once again, back for yet another round of the Sport Pilot PTS. New microphone this time, so all those people who are complaining about the audio quality, all one of you, hopefully you're happy now. All right, so last time we talked explaining certificates, medical privileges, eligibility, all that stuff. Now we're talking about locating and explaining airworthiness and registration, operating limitations, placards, instrument markings, and flight training supplements, then weight and balance data, and or equipment list as applicable. Okay, you have probably been taught before the ARROW acronym. That's ARROW. That stands for Airworthiness Registration, Radio Operator's Handbook, POH, and weight and balance. That is sort of the blanket thing that people say is what you need to have in the airplane whenever you're going flying, and that is what would need to be produced in the event of a ramp check. At least that's what people say. So we're going to check out the regulations supporting that. So for airworthiness and registration certificates, you can go over to Part 91, 203, Civil Aircraft Certifications Requirement. A, no person may operate a civil aircraft unless within it has the following. And number one there, you see an appropriate and current airworthiness certificate. If you're in the light sport world, you most likely have a special airworthiness certificate, but that's still an airworthiness certificate. And that airworthiness certificate does not expire. It lasts so long as the airplane conforms to the manufacturer's requirements that it got when it was manufactured. Number two down here in Part 91, 203, you have to have an effective U.S. registration certificate. So those are, and it needs to be issued to the owner for operation within the United States. So you may or may not get the question, when does registration expire? And unlike airworthiness certificates, registrations actually do expire. There was a time when they expired every 7 years, a time when they expired every 5 years, and there's been a couple weirdnesses out there, especially with COVID. So I have stopped giving people an answer of when they expire. And the simple answer is they expire whenever they say they expire. So go grab your registration from the plane you're using, take a look at it, it'll have an expiration date on it. All right, and then no person may operate a civil aircraft unless the airworthiness certificate required by paragraph A of this section is displayed in the cabin or cockpit entrance so that it is legible to passengers or crew. So can't be hidden away somewhere. It's got to be visible out there. That's why you'll find most of these things in little plastic cards or something. Okay. Next section here, talking about operating limits, placards, instrument markings, and flight training supplements. So we'll start with the easy one first. The flight training supplement is literally just a supplement for flight training. You can think of it almost like an expanded POH. It is not required to be in the airplane at all times, but the manufacturer is required to have one for special light sport aircraft, which probably is most likely what you're flying. So it's going to have a ton of useful data in there. I highly recommend you read it, but it doesn't need to be in the airplane. You're definitely going to want to bring that to your check ride. If there's a question as to how to do something, you should refer to the flight training supplement unless you've got a very good reason to do otherwise. Instrument markings, placards, and operating limits. Those are going to be limits found in your POH for your light sport airplane. Let's come over here to Part 91.9, and it says A, no person may operate a civil aircraft without complying with the operating limitations specified in the approved airplane flight manual, markings, and placards, or as otherwise prescribed by the certificating authority. Now, it does talk about an approved airplane flight manual. We do not have an approved airplane flight manual, or AFM. That's a specific legal definition, and the manual that we have does not meet those legal definitions. So you might say, oh, great, we're off the hook. Not so fast, me bucko. Part 2 down there, it says for which an airplane flight manual is not required. So if we have an aircraft where the flight manual is not required, our airplane, you need to have available in the aircraft current approved airplane flight manual, approved manual material, markings and placards, or any combination thereof. And so that's where we fall in on this spectrum. You need to have, there is no approved airplane flight manual. You need to have, quote, approved manual material, which in our case is the POH in general. Manufacturers are given some leeway, but I have not yet seen a special light sport aircraft that did not issue a POH. And of course, those placards are required as well as those markings. And you're required to comply with those placards and markings. Okay, last bit here is weight and balance data. It's going to be locating and explaining weight and balance data and or equipment list as applicable. So weight and balance is probably the first topic that we've covered here that really deserves its own video, and I plan to make that one next. So keep a lookout for that one. But purely in terms of locating it and explaining it, I have a little spot here written in a black background, and you'll notice it's no reference. That's because I wrote it. And so here's the danger here. This is my opinion. You can read this, or I can read it for you. So this is a kind of a tricky one because weight and balance is the W in ARROW as a required document in the airplane. But if you look for where that requirement comes from, you'll have a difficult time of it. There's no really one regulation that makes things clear. The closest thing you get to a requirement is in 91.9 for quote-unquote manual material, which is what we talked about just a few minutes ago. There is a regulation in Part 91 for the pilot to be, quote, familiar with the takeoff and landing data for your flight, end quote. And you could argue that because the takeoff and landing performance is extremely or highly affected by weight, you would need to have that in the airplane. Two problems with that. It doesn't include balance information, and nowhere in that regulation would it imply that you needed that information on the airplane. So there is a spot in Part 23 that requires the aircraft flight manual, so that approved flight manual, to have weight and balance information. And so that is most likely where people are typically getting that. However, most light sport aircraft are not certified under Part 23. They're certified under the ATSM standards. And the ATSM standards might require that information, but those standards are proprietary. If I wanted to get access to those, I would have to pay, last I checked, like $70. I'm not doing that. So ATSM is generally not provided to the public, So, and the FAA is not going to expect you to have gone and examined those standards. They're going to expect you to have examined, the regular operating limits of the airplane, Part 91, Part 61, etc. So, that being said, generally speaking, FAA inspectors will expect to see a weight and balance sheet if you are ever ramp checked, and examiners expect to see it if you ever take a check ride. And so you could probably lawyer your way out of this if you were quite good at it and you had an understanding individual on the other end. However, I am generally not in favor of that. I would suggest that you carry those documents with you, have them ready, and be able to present them. But just know that it probably isn't technically legally required. Now, if you do go and find a legal requirement, put it in a comment below the video, and I will issue a formal apology. But I could not find one. So, the best of luck to you. All right. That's it from me, champ.